views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronxtalk. Tonight's guest is the Speaker of the Assembly, the Bronx's own Carl Heastie. We're going to talk with him tonight about a range of issues, including some developments in his own district, the 83rd, that includes the Bronx neighborhoods of Edenwald, Williamsbridge, Eastchester, and Gun Hill. We'll also get into national and state politics, questions about ethics and criminal justice reform, pay raises for legislators, and maybe even a crystal ball look into the next legislative session. If you have questions or comments, send an email to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org or post them on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. For the here and now, he is the Speaker of the Assembly and the Assemblyman from the 83rd in the Bronx. Welcome back to Carl Heastie. Nice to have you.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you for having me.
I can tell the viewers you have a little bit of a cold, so if you sound a little scratchy, we will all forgive you and appreciate that you came in.
And I apologize if I cough in between some of my answers.
We have a lot to talk about. Let's start with the campaign for president. Congressman Elijah Cummings of Maryland is saying the FBI was pressured by the GOP to pursue the latest investigation into Secretary Clinton's emails. This would be just a horrible statement about justice in this country. Do you think that sort of influence is what happened here with the Secretary's emails?
I'm not really sure what the influence is, but you know, I've been an observer of, I'd say, the operations of the FBI. Traditionally, they don't really give updates or highlights of their investigations. And I know that the director said that he was concerned that people would say that he, withheld information. But I think people probably would have preferred him saying, well, we didn't say anything about new emails because we didn't want to influence an election. We just wanted to do our jobs. I think that would have been a better response and a better answer.
Mm-hmm. There are, again, you read so many things, and there are allegations, and there's all kinds of stories that come out, and it becomes very difficult to track what is true and what is not true. But one of the stories that came out today said that he might have had the information for weeks and then held it to deliver it just before the election. That, again, would raise some concern for all of us, I think. And I know you don't have inside
I'm just saying,
info.
I think if we have to start to question the FBI, that's a bigger problem than what many of us may be thinking about. I think we always want to have faith that the federal government, is acting correctly and in the best interest. But just in my opinion, I think it would have just been better, and they've always done their investigations. They do their investigations, and wherever the facts lead them, that's usually where they go. I didn't need an update, on this. I think the American people would have been fine without getting an update, and whatever the result of the new group of emails be it, and whatever it bears out. And I think it should have been handled at that point.
How do you read the so-called horse race between the two candidates right now? Obviously, the polls have favored Clinton. I think the poll that I saw today said that even though this has come out just days before the election, that hasn't changed people's minds. Are you confident that she will win? Clearly, you're supporting Hillary Clinton, needless to say. How do you read it?
I think if you, and also she has the advantage of the early voting. So I think that's in her favor. I think that Donald Trump's road to 270 was difficult to begin with, and I don't think this has really changed much. And I think really the tightening of the race is just a natural finding of Republicans going home. So I don't really think this has had much impact, because I honestly believe that people are a little more focused on the issues and where people stand. and not so much wrapped up into the whole saga with the emails.
What initiatives, if she is elected president, what initiatives do you see a President Clinton achieving? I mean, is free community college a reality? Can she rope in the cost of Obamacare? Let's look 4 years ahead. If she is elected, what do you expect?
Well, I would say if we're really looking at hope of what she can do, I think the concerns around Obamacare would be one. I think the issues around college affordability, I think that's one of the next great crises in this country. And then the income inequality has really been is something that she's spoken about quite frequently, trying to really deal with having just the 1% of the country having all of the wealth. So I think if she's able to tackle those things, I think it can really continue and grow on the work that President Obama's done over the last 8 years.
I certainly want to move to more local issues. Final question on that. Do you see that income inequality issue as being simply tax the rich, that you can generate more social programs and other things that you need, and that's where there is a bulge of money that can be tapped?
Well, it's not just taxing the rich. It's really the redistribution of wealth, I think, is more of an apt description. So it's not just trying to take more money out of the rich. I think it's, again, like I said, the redistribution of wealth.
Mr. Speaker, usually I save talk about your district to the end of the show because we deal with so many political issues and other things of import. But I know you're overjoyed about the new YMCA coming to Edenwald, and I can tell folks very briefly, when he was first elected to the Assembly, I was at the Marshall Lou Montefiore Community Center, and you and I took a tour, and I remember you saying to me, this is exactly what I need. It's taken a while. What does it take to make something happen like getting a new YMCA for the Edenwald section of the Bronx?
Well, I think the community has to really push and be supportive of it. I think the elected officials, in conjunction with each other, have to be supportive of it, because these projects are very, very expensive. And so, one office, one political office, or one elected office can't solve this. So it's really been I'd say a group effort. There's a lot of people in the community. Some people who wanted this, and then they've now passed on. So we were always saying that when this is built, we want to honor some of those people who really fought for it. But I think it really takes a community buy-in, and you have to really get cooperation amongst elected officials to accomplish something this large.
I would say in the 22 plus years that we've done this program, the issue of what are our youth going to do after school, parents always concerned about their kids, and even keeping adults properly recreated and giving them opportunities for educational advancement is probably the largest issue that I've heard over and over again. All over the state, you've visited counties all over the state. They're desperate for these kinds of facilities. How can we raise this up the priority list when you get to the Assembly and certainly in the State Senate, so that, number one, the concept is recognized that this is a good thing for communities, and then number two, we can turn this into reality to get more recreational facilities in community centers?
I think it really, to me, starts with the local communities identifying, because communities are the same, but they're also different facilities. One of the reasons why it took us so long to get it in my neighborhood is we didn't have a space for it, so we had to work with the city to lease, do a long-term lease to allow for this to be built. But I think once the local communities say that this is something that is needed, I think when there's a community buy-in in elected officials, and as I say, it moves up the chain of command, I think then at that point it makes it a little easier. But these are costly. But then you can also have, since we have existing buildings, particularly like schools and things like that, you can turn the schools into community centers, as well. So in places where you can't afford to spend this kind of money to build a building, we really could look back at opening up the schools.
Are these things a hard sell to your colleagues? Maybe it's a political thing on the Democratic side, the Republican side. When it comes to budget time, and one of the legislators says, "I need $14 million or something for a facility like this."
Well, this is we get into the challenge of the media when they start to complain that we have these discretionary pots of money that we can apply for, but all of the projects have to be vetted. And one of the reasons why I guess I ask people's understanding and patience is when we pass the budget on March 31st, that means there's a whole year in between before you get to the next budget. Things and needs come up in the middle of the year. And under the process that we have now, when these grants are put in, applied, the Assembly vets it, the Department of Budget vets it, the DASNY, the Dormitory Authority vets it, the Controller vets it, and the Attorney General vets it. But these are where these type of projects, when you have this kind of flexibility and understanding and cooperation amongst elected officials, that this year it's a need in my district, but next year it could be a need in someone else's district.
And it's going to take at least a year to get to be able to present it, and then of course you need the forethought to put the proposal together and everything else. When you were here last time, we talked about your experiences traveling to upstate districts. Now there's a movement to create an upstate caucus. You've shot down the idea. They claim that, for example, the minimum wage, we're going to be going up to $15 an hour, but upstate communities will go to $12.50. Can you understand the need for the caucus, or at this point, do you just say, you know what, this is not a good idea?
There is already an upstate caucus. It's called the Democratic Conference of the Assembly. The majority leader of the Assembly represents the Rochester area. And as I said when I was on the show last year, what we do, it's really, we defer to each other. So when there's been needs for upstate New York, members particularly downstate here in the city, we support those initiatives and vice versa. So when we get in a conference, there's no upstate versus downstate. We get in that room, the 106 or 107 of us, we talk about our statewide needs, and we could put together a package that tries to address all of those needs. But there is no forsaking upstate New York for downstate New York. People use that for political purposes. I get it. It sounds good in an election, but it's really not a fact.
When you did the tour of the upstate cities, so you could look at Buffalo, at Rochester, Albany, Yonkers, other than New York City, I guess those are the largest cities in the state. Do you find that they have similar problems and similar issues to what we have in the Bronx? Or do you, say, gee whiz, well, they really have this, which we don't have?
Well, one of the things that
Syracuse was another
Syracuse,
one.
Yeah. As I toured the state, like I said, you do have regional differences, but for the most part, people want the same things. But I did find, in particular in larger cities, you have the issues of poverty. You have the issues of trying to make sure that education issues are addressed as well, particularly in the bigger cities. So I'd say those were common factors that I noticed in the tours of the non-New York City cities.
You mentioned education. Were you among those who were disappointed that we only got 1 year of mayoral control? Did you feel that kind of you kind of were forced into it, and that's the direction it had to go?
Unfortunately, mayoral control was a football that was thrown around. To me, whether people support mayoral control or not, I think the most important thing is the stability of the school system, and I think it's unfair to ask the mayor to provide stability on a 1-year contract that has to happen. I'm hopeful next year that we'll get more of a 1-year commitment on mayoral control. But I think that's really the problem. It's about providing stability to the school system.
Another hot button issue, you call it a football, is this idea of ethics reform. The governor wanted to tie it into a pay raise and say, well, you want a pay raise, then do this. You seem to reject that idea. Talk a little bit, first of all, about the prospects for real ethics reform, closing the LLC loophole, for example, for the next session.
For us in the Assembly, we passed the limits on outside income, and we also passed the LLC loophole. So it's really up to what the Senate decides to do. Those are things that we support. Those things we understand. And as we continue to clamor for more ethics, I get it, I understand, but we've done a lot. We can continue to do more. But I think really what it really comes down to is it's really individuals, morality. We can pass all the laws that we want, we can pass all the rules that we want, but ultimately it's up to an individual's morality for them to either do the right thing or decide to do the wrong thing.
The city council banned outside income and then gave
With a lot of loopholes.
Well, I understand that, but gave hefty raises to the city council. You have argued for pay raises irrespective of this issue. Could that be a direction that the state goes, that ultimately legislators will get a raise and then you say, you know what, no more outside income?
Again, it depends on what the salary is. I do get the idea that people don't want to see conflicts, and that's why you want to kind of limit the outside income, because you want to make sure the legislator is concentrating on their job, and that's their primary responsibility. But again, it should not be in a trade, and I've been clear with that with the governor, and that I think that on the merits alone, legislators deserve a pay raise. It hasn't happened in 19 years. And I think one of the biggest factors that when I sent my letter to the Pay Commission was the $79,500 that people made in 1998, that the buying power has shrunk to $53,000. So it's not even about a pay raise. It's really a cost of living adjustment, and people have real lives that they have to deal with. Their families they have to support, children they have to put through college. And then I think one of the things that people don't understand is there's no amount of money that can compensate some of the young mothers who are away from their children when they're in Albany. And I think that's sometimes some things that people don't realize, that people make individual sacrifices to be in Albany 6 months out the year. And I don't think there's any amount of money that can compensate you for the sacrifices that we make.
Do you think that the relatively low pay, I mean, for people who don't know, and you've already quoted the number, it's just under $80,000 a year for a legislator. Do you think that that has contributed to legislators looking for outside work? In other words, they say, gee, it is kind of a full-time job, but for me to really make a little more money, if I have a family and do a lot of traveling through the state or whatever, then I've got to make a little more money. Has that contributed to it?
I think there's a number of reasons why people still have outside income. If you're a person, let's say a lawyer, and you practice law, if you don't practice law for 10 years while you serve in the legislature, when you decide to leave, you're a little stale in your practice. So I think people still like to practice their skills so that when they do decide to leave the legislature, they can still be current in their practice. And I do think people do it for the income as well. So I think those are the two factors why people still like to have it.
You have said numerous times, and many of your colleagues who in the Assembly who've come on here have talked about, gee, well, we passed this, but it never gets through the Senate. Do you think that you can achieve a Democratic majority in the Senate on this election day, or are you getting there? How do you view what's coming up?
Well,
I know you're forever hopeful.
Well, right. I'm a Democrat. I support Democrats. I think after November 8th, we'll see what the tallies are, and then I guess it will be up to, if the Democrats pick up seats, I guess then that's up to Jeff Klein and Andrew Stewart Cousins to have a conversation about the future of the Senate. But I think it all depends on what happens on November 8th.
How do you feel about the IDC? You've already alluded to it. Does that complicate matters for you? And can we ask, have you talked to, who I know you view as a colleague and you share parts of the same district, have you talked to Senator Klein about that?
So Jeff and I have been friends for over 20 years. We talk all the time. We talk pretty frequently. The relationship with the IDC is fine. We work together to accomplish a lot of things, particularly paid family leave and minimum wage. But in my heart, as a Democrat, I would love to see Jeff and Andrea figure something out.
To try and work together. So let's talk a little bit about police and criminal justice reform. The Times had a pretty strong piece attacking the state legislature for being non-progressive when it comes to low-level crimes and police reforms. The city council backed off the Right to Know Act. As you look ahead into the next session, do you think there will be decriminalization or more reforms including things like the incarceration of 16 and 17-year-olds, which has come up?
You know, I do like to chastise the media sometimes. And I think
I'm assuming present company accepted.
right. No,
You won't assume
excluded.
that. Oh, okay.
One of my frustrations is that when the media writes these articles, they don't point out the House of the Legislature that hasn't done some of these reforms. If it was up to us in the Assembly, many of the things that was in that article we would have done already. But I would say that come next session, you know, and I've stated this before, that I would almost feel my speakership would be in vain if we didn't do some real criminal justice reform, raise the age, grand jury reform, bail reform. I think it is high time that we do take a real hard look, and we've gotten some of the other progressive issues taken care of, and I do think you'll see the Assembly will really focus more on criminal justice reform this year.
Do you like the new police commissioner? Do you think that James O'Neill is the right guy for the job? Many people, many of your colleagues have said, you know what, he's going to emphasize community policing and those kinds of approaches to criminal justice. What do you think?
I'm a big proponent of community policing. I think that that's the way to go, and it's really it's the mayor's choice. And the mayor feels comfortable with the new police commissioner, and if he, I'd say, holds to the principles that he said that he would is really going to look to push, then I think it'll be fine.
What do you think about kind of the atmosphere that's out there about which includes, of course, Black Lives Matter. It includes football players and other athletes, taking a knee during the national anthem. You, of course, a patriotic American. How do you feel about those kinds of expressions in the face of, law enforcement?
I think one of the great things about this country is that people should have the right and the freedom to express themselves. And I think that people are really growing frustrated, and they want to see some kind of change happen when it comes to the interaction with police and communities of color. And people are just finding ways to express that. And I think more importantly than people becoming frustrated with people's expressions of their frustration, I think we really need to start to look and see how can we really get out of this feeling amongst communities of color that we're treated differently than non-communities of color. And I really think that's what people's focus should really be, about really trying now to see how we can change this, the situations where it just seems that far too often these interactions end up with deadly circumstances.
Do you think this is a matter of police training, or it's an attitudinal thing in the police force, not only here, of course, in New York, but it's nationwide?
I think it's all of those things, and I do think when you have community policing, and even the young people in the community know the police officer, I think their reaction is a little different if the officer approaches them to have a discussion, instead of just always the first interaction seems to be in a policing manner and not so much in a community manner. So I think all of those things need to be addressed.
Swinging the pendulum on the other side, did you think the mayor acted precipitously when he stood up and said that that horrible tragedy of Deborah Danner being shot was a failure of policing before there was any investigation? Highly unusual stance for a New York City mayor to take.
Well, I think when you look at the overall situation, and you say to yourself, like I said, I'm not an investigator. That's up to the district attorney, and I've spoken to her, and she's, going to look into that. But I think if you just, on the outside looking in, you just say to yourself, that's probably a situation that should not have happened. And I think that's probably where the mayor was coming from, that if you look at it and you take into account everyone who was there, could some other action have been taken by the police so that it didn't result in her death.
Mr. Speaker, we're almost out of time. What would you want to tell me next year when you come back on our program and say, we got this, and this done? What are you looking forward to as you get, across the new year and when you get back up to Albany?
I'd say that the two biggest issues, one we already talked about was criminal justice reform. I'd say the other one would be to continuing to change the situation, the educational system, in terms of providing more funding, really pushing the community schools model that we passed in the budget. So I would say that those are probably the two biggest issues that I could see us dealing with.
Do you think that on those issues you're going to get a lot of kickback in, for example, a Republican Senate? I mean, there's no question the Assembly is reasonably unified on these kinds of things, but it sounds like those two issues are somewhat common sense issues.
Well, you got to think about it. If I was on this show a year ago today and I told you that we were going to have a minimum wage increase and paid family leave with a Republican Senate, you probably would have said,
I might have.
Dreaming.
We could rewind the tape and go look.
But this is the thing, Albany is the art of compromise. Like I said, hopefully there's a Democratic Senate. I think if there's a Democratic Senate, these issues will be a little easier, to deal with. But if on November 8th and elections fall out that there's still a Republican leadership, it's my job to still do the best I can to make sure that the people of the state of New York and their needs are met, and that's the commitment that I'll continue to have.
Speaker Carl Hastie, it's always great to have you on the show, and I know you don't do a lot of these, and we really appreciate that you come here and do this show.
Thank you for having me, Gary.
Okay. Folks, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org or put them on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. We ask you to like Bronx Talk on Facebook. You can check out the archives at bronxnet.org. Bronx Talk is on the lower right navigation bar. Next week, we'll focus on Bronx veterans in honor of Veterans Day. Thanks to our producer, Jayla, and our director and production supervisor is Michael. We'll see you next week. Good night.
Born in Joplin, Missouri, was fascinated by anything with wheels and a motor. The odds of him going on to fascinate millions with his talent, 1 in 260,000. The odds of this born racer having 157 career top 10 finishes in NASCAR, 1 in 125 billion. The odds of him winning both the Daytona 500 and the Brickyard 400 in the same year, 1 in 195 million. The odds of a child being diagnosed with autism, 1 in 68. I'm NASCAR driver Jamie McMurray, and my niece has autism. Learn more at autismspeaks.org/signs.